someone who you're on the opposite side of the table with in one situation, they may end up being your ally in another. And so you always want to be careful with managing those relationships and keeping them good and above board where you can.
Welcome to An Ounce of Prevention, the podcast. At our recent associates, we believe that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Our daily commitment lies in informing our clients about legal risks without hindering their business objectives. As we like to say, we're in the business of building companies and helping executives sleep at night. So stay tuned. Maybe you'll learn something that'll help your business grow and thrive.
Welcome to An Ounce of Prevention, the podcast, where we believe an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I'm your host, Rachel Reese. Today we're joined by Chris Canon, Vice President of Land at Ridge Runner Resources II. Ridge Runner is an NCAP-backed operator focused on the Delaware Basin of the Permian. Before Ridge Runner, Chris was VP of Land and Legal at Percussion, with stints at Griffin, Maverick, and Brightburn before that. Don't forget to stick around for our much-loved Caselaw update after the episode. Welcome to the podcast, Chris.
Thanks for having me.
So excited that you're here today.
Yeah, great to be here.
So Chris is here today to teach us about acreage swaps. So Chris, when we say acreage swap, what are we talking about?
Well, you're usually talking about where you have two operators who strategically they see an opportunity to be able to trade acreage to uplift their working interest or provide a better position for them to develop at a higher and better economics. It's usually a good win-win. It's a good opportunity to forego other types of vehicles for acquisitions. Usually, if you can't do a full-on buyout of someone's interest, it's usually a good strategic opportunity. So,
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And how many of these would you say that you've done over your career?
I've done probably, I was thinking about this the other day, I've probably done between 30 and 40, I think, over the course of my career. I started in the Midland Basin many years ago. When I was at Brightburn, it was kind of a new concept. And very, very few people were actively engaged in big trades at the time. And so we had very few horizontal locations. We were a vertical operator. And we're beginning to go horizontal like everyone else was around the mid-2010s.
Well, I think you touched on what we were going to talk about next is why they've become so prolific just in the past few years, especially in the bigger basins.
Yeah. So when we first started out at Brightburn, looking at it, there was a small group of us that were sitting in a room, and we only saw one opportunity that was two other large operators that had put a form out there. And so we built our original form based off of that and began doing what I called the road show, and went out and started talking with other operators. One thing that we came across was that, like in those examples, was that a lot of people needed to keep their vertical production in order to keep their keep their public reporting up and their investors happy. And so what we ended up doing was trading. We were keeping out the vertical production and trading the undeveloped acreage so that people could go horizontal. And so we started with that and started to build a form out and started trading with it. Had some good traction with a few other operators, some big guys, some small independents, and slowly uplifted from back then. We went from we had I think it was 8 locations at 35% working interest, and by the time we were done, we had 116 locations at an average working interest of 96%. So It was huge, even doing it through Brightburn's bankruptcy, having to get the judge to approve the trades, but they still made sense, and ultimately it was a huge win for the company. So that was really where I cut my teeth, was over in Howard Martin County, and then have carried those concepts over the years on through to where I am today. And so we continue to do it. It's become a very popular vehicle for people. So
you've got, maybe in a regularly shaped lease, right? And you have locations that are full locations, and this is the longest lateral that we can drill. It makes the most economic sense. And then you've got at least I used to see these sort of half locations, right?
Yeah.
Where you're like,
Yeah.
well, if we could get the other side of this
Yeah.
lease line, but right now this is where we're stuck.
Yeah.
No one's going to drill that half location.
Yeah.
But if you can get the swap, all of a sudden you've got another full well that you can bring on.
Exactly. And so we call it trade bait. There's usually trade bait sitting out there that you can, find opportunities to, hey, if we give you this tract, you give us this tract, and we get out of each other's way and we can move on down the road. And so it creates a good win-win.
Attention, all you deal makers in the Houston area. Get ready for the inaugural Dealmakers Haunted Hall Gala on October 23rd at Meow Wolf Radio Tav. It's going to be a night of networking, giving back, and some spooky thrills. The Dealmakers Haunted Hall Gala is your chance to meet with industry leaders while making a real impact on the communities we serve. This event isn't just about fun, it's about giving back to those in need. We're looking for sponsors to help make this event a success. With sponsorship levels ranging from $2,000 to $5,000, every contribution goes towards supporting local communities and making a difference where it matters most. The more sponsors, the greater the impact. We need your help to make this unforgettable. Visit www.rreeselaw.com for information about events, tickets, and sponsorships. Email rlamphere@rreeselaw.com to sponsor and be a part of something bigger than just an event. Let's make Halloween one to remember. Dealmakers Haunted Hall Gala, where the networking meets charity in the spookiest way possible.
When you're thinking about your drilling program, at what point during that cycle do you say, okay, we need to approach this other operator for this swap?
So, I was thinking about this. I think you're always looking at your opportunities, but I would say that, it begins very early on. I would say as soon as you acquire the property, you're starting to look at, okay, what can we do with this? How do we pick out what area, what areas do we like the most?
Yep.
So first off, I think you start there is, okay, what locations from the technical team do y'all like the most? Let's begin there. Okay, who are our partners? How much do they have? Where do we have other interests with them? Where can we approach them with an opportunity? And usually I'll approach them and say, look, let's work down through the list of opportunities. So number one would be a flat out acquisition of your interest in this unit that we want to develop. If you're not interested in that, then what about a trade or a swap? That's usually second on the list. And if not, then let's look at JV opportunities. So a trade is usually the second in the natural progression of deal structures that you're looking at doing with other interest owners and the DSUs you want to develop. So you're beginning it very early on and taking it all the way through to the point of spud. I mean, there are trade opportunities that fall together at the very end. I mean, you can begin with early on where it's just a concept of a unit, and usually other interest owners want to know some information about what your development plans are and whatnot, and you start working through that. And if you have to go through a pooling process, there's it can come together even up through the pooling hearing. So it's always a concept that's on the table, and you just keep working those things right up until the very end. And sometimes they can be contentious right up to the very end, but once you get there, everyone walks away really happy.
Absolutely. And I assume networking helps a lot with that, with sort of getting in front of them and having that initial conversation.
Exactly. Yeah. It's networking is a huge part of it. You want to build a good relationship with your counterpart. You want to you want to keep that conversation going. Let them know that you're there to deal above board and be fair and create a win-win.
Yeah.
You're not trying to pull one over on them. I think having a good relationship and credible relationship is incredibly important with whoever you're deling with.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
I mean, I personally don't like doing deals with people that I don't know, because it means that I probably won't see them later.
Yeah, exactly.
If something goes bad, all of a sudden I can't find them.
Without doubt, you just, I learned this, early on in law school many years ago that, someone who you're on the opposite side of the table with in one situation, they may end up being your ally in another. And so, you always want to be careful with managing those relationships and keeping them, good and above board where you can,
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
I always try to make sure that, to instill that with my team also, that, hey, you never know when these can come back to you. So when you're working like specifically with trades, you need to make sure that those, your network is strong and that your relationships are good and credible and above board.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
And when you're working a deal, things can get heated.
Yeah.
And you're not necessarily happy with the other side. But
Yeah.
you got to remember this is a long game.
Yeah,
We're all
exactly. So, it is very important to maintain those, especially when it comes to trades, because one good opportunity can lead to more in the future.
Absolutely. Maybe they're approaching you with trades next.
Well, and that's the thing. That's what I've noticed, is that, especially with trades, is that once you get that first one across the finish line, you never know what the next opportunity may be. And once you have done a good one with with a solid operator, what may be tough in the beginning ends up becoming a very, suddenly they're back at the table with you, immediately saying, hey, let's do another one. That was great.
Okay, so you've got Acreage to swap, you've got buy-in from the other operator. What are some of the hurdles that you may encounter before the trade is done?
Number one hurdle is going to be making sure that you have a proper contract structure in place, that you understand what it is that what the basic framework of the deal is going to be. Are you going to be trading pure undeveloped acreage? Is there going to be production involved? How do we take into account the quality of the production involved, the valuation of it? A lot of people, what they like to do is hold out the production,
Right.
because it just overcomplicates the deal. And it's easier just to hold that production back. But then, as you get into, okay, well, we're both going to be on top of each other here on the same property drilling wells.
Right.
How do we address, simultaneous operations on the same tract?
Absolutely.
And so as you start diving into the contract itself, you need to take into consideration those things. Mutual indemnities, like I said, usually simultaneous operations is a big source of I don't want to say contention, but something that needs to definitely be addressed.
Absolutely. We should do a podcast episode on
Yeah.
simultaneous
Yeah.
operations.
Yeah, it is. When I first started doing trades, that was, I think, the most the area where I spent the most time, me personally, focusing on how do we address this so that everyone is safe and everything is accounted for.
Absolutely.
As you're getting into the drafting of the agreement, I think those are some main things that you want to take into consideration. Are there burdens that are uneven? Is someone trading at do they have a higher NRI than you, net revenue interest? How do you address that? Are they going to hold back an overriding royalty or some other form in order to balance it out? How do we make this an even swap?
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a cash component involved, so sometimes you end up saying, okay, well, hey, we're uneven X number of acres. What's a dollar value so we can smooth it over and make it a square deal? And so there's different pieces to build into the agreement as you're going through it.
What sort of out of the ordinary diligence do you need to be thinking about when you're doing a swap as opposed to just a buyout? Or is there any?
There really is not. I would say that, when you're doing a trade, it's usually, I would say it's usually easier to do diligence because both sides, they want, you're aligned in your interests. And so versus wherever you have a buy-sell side sort of situation, an acquisition or a divestiture, the seller is wanting to, show what they own so that they don't have the value defected. But at the same time, they're also, wanting to be careful about defending themselves from defects as they go. And so versus whenever you're getting into a trade situation, both sides are mutually aligned where they want to prove up, hey, I'm good with this acreage, just like you're good.
Yeah.
And so
because both sides are a buyer and a seller at the same time.
You got it. And so there's a lot of mutual alignment there of interest. And so both sides, usually I would say whenever you're doing a trade situation, there's a lot more cooperation, a lot more full disclosure, which is always nice. And you're not either on the offense or the defense, because like I said, there are certain buyers or sellers out there that you have to be careful with that are, trying to play games. And so a trade usually makes that a much more, smoothed out process. And so what I personally like to do usually is do the diligence while we're drafting up the agreement. And so that by the time we get to signing the trade agreement, all cards are on the table. Everyone knows what's going on, and you sign and close the deal on the same day, and we all move on.
And I would think it's easier if we're talking about swapping unproductive acreage.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
A lot less to diligence.
Yes, there is. It's usually a much easier process, and so.
Okay, so how long would you say this process takes from the first conversation to the close? Usually
it takes about a month. I would say a month to 2 months. Usually is your typical length of trade. Once you've identified the properties that the acreage that you want to swap. From the point of that to closing, it's usually about a month to 2 months.
Okay. That's not bad.
No, it's really not that bad. I mean, I've had ones that, I've gotten done in a matter of a couple of weeks, and I've had ones that have drug on for, 4 or 5 months, but usually those get into more extreme situations. But I would say a month to 2 months is your typical sort of, negotiation and closing period for these types of agreements. So.
And you think that's because in the swap situation, like you mentioned, both parties are incentivized to get it done?
Exactly. Yeah. Both sides they're motivated. And usually by the time you get to a point where you've agreed to the acreage, both sides are excited to get their acreage developed because they have big plans for it.
Okay, so before we wrap up, I want to make sure we talk about tax implications of swapping. So even unproductive acreage is considered real property in Texas. I want you to explain to the audience a little bit about 1031 transactions.
A 1031 is a like-kind exchange under the revenue code, and basically what you're doing there is what you're saying is that the value that I have assigned to this property, I am going to take that value and effectively sell it and buy into another property that is of like value or near like value. And by doing that, I don't have to, I avoid the tax consequences for the sale of my property to buy into the new property. So you're kind of piggybacking on that value into the new property. So when it comes to trades, 1031s, there's really two items I think you want to address. And I'm no tax expert, but usually you want to address in your agreement whether or not there's a tax partnership involved. I usually like to say that this is not a tax partnership. We are avoiding that. Usually in the agreement, if there's a section that says if the party chooses to engage in a 1031 exchange, the other side agrees to do it. Usually you're going to use a third party. There's third party specialists that will draft up all the paperwork, and the other side really is not very involved on their side on the 1031. Usually it's a matter of the other side that is not engaging in the 1031. You provide them the basic paperwork that shows them, hey, this is what we're doing, so there's a disclosure part to it. But usually it's up to each side whether or not they want to engage in the 1031.
Yep.
And you kind of handle that over and above the deal. So 1031s, I think, are a good way, and they're very useful because you're not affecting the overall value of your asset base. And so that helps a lot, especially in Texas with undeveloped lands. And so I would say that where you can perform a 1031, it's always useful to do it. to help with the potential tax implications. So
Completely agree.
Yeah.
Completely agree. Okay. Well, Chris, any final thoughts for our audience if they're interested in doing a trade?
Well, I'm always open for business to do trades. No, but
Ridge Runner Resources.
No, I would say they're very useful. Very useful. They become very popular. I've seen a big attraction within the industry, especially as consolidation happens among operators of positions. That they are a very useful way to overcome the hurdles of the buy-sell process and to mutually uplift value for everyone in whatever basin they're doing. So I would highly recommend that you look at trade as an option on the table, if not the best option on the table. So, yeah.
Well, great. Thank you so much for joining me today.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
If you have any questions about this show or you would like to be a guest on our podcast, please email us at podcast@rreislaw.com. We'll see you next time. And now it's time for another case law update. Today we're talking about Cactus Water Services, LLC versus COG Operating, LLC, a major decision just handed down by the Supreme Court of Texas that addresses a novel and increasingly important question in oil and gas law. Who owns produced water? Here's what happened. COG Operating held oil and gas leases covering about 37,000 acres in Reeves County, Texas, which gave COG the right to produce oil, gas, and other hydrocarbons. But those leases didn't say anything specific about produced water, which is, for those of you who don't know, the briny, sometimes toxic liquid waste that comes up from the ground along with oil and gas. Traditionally, this stuff has been viewed as waste, something to dispose of. But recently, due to water scarcity, recycling technologies, and the value of some of the components that can be found in produced water, like lithium, produced water has become a commodity. That's where the fight began. In 2019, Cactus Water signed agreements with surface owners purporting to lease their rights to the water on and from the tracts covered by COG's leases, including the produced water coming from COG's wells. Cactus argued that because water is part of the surface estate, and because the oil and gas leases didn't specifically mention water rights, the surface owners retained ownership of the produced water once the oil and gas was separated. COG disagreed. They argued that produced water is oil and gas waste, and the right to produce oil and gas necessarily includes the right to handle and dispose of that waste. COG pointed to long-standing industry practice and regulatory frameworks that puts the burden and responsibility of waste disposal on the mineral lessee. When Cactus asserted that it had the right to the produced water and could even prevent COG from moving it off the property, COG sued for a declaration that the produced water belonged to COG. The trial court sided with COG, and so did the 8th Court of Appeals in Austin. And now, so has the Texas Supreme Court. Here's the court's reasoning. The justices said that produced water is not just water. While it contains water molecules, it's a waste product under Texas law, one that comes up through the well with hydrocarbons and must be dealt with by the operator. Granting someone the right to produce oil and gas includes the implied right to manage and dispose of the resulting waste. The court made it clear that the only way the surface owner could have retained ownership of that water would be by an explicit reservation in the oil and gas lease. Since no such reservation existed here, the right to possess, control, and dispose of the produced water belonged to COG. But what about the fact that produced water is now potentially valuable? The court said that this does not change the deal. You interpret a lease based on what the parties understood at the time it was signed, not based on later technological developments or market changes. So if you're an operator, a saltwater disposal company, or a water recycling company in Texas, you finally have some clarity about who owns produced water and its constituent components. But before you run out and assume that the operator always owns produced water, make sure you are checking the leases covering the particular tract, especially if they were drafted after the ruling in this case. That's it for this case law update. Thanks for tuning in. I'd like to thank Kanika Drakshuram, a law clerk in our Houston office, for her help on this update.
The information and material in this episode is general information about our practice and firm and is for educational and informational purposes only. This information does not offer specific legal advice, and the use of this information does not create an attorney-client relationship with RRNA or any of its attorneys. The information in this episode, or any episode of An Ounce of Prevention, should not be considered legal advice, and persons should not act upon this information without first engaging professional legal counsel.
Thank you for listening to An Ounce of Prevention, presented by R. Reese & Associates. If you found this episode informative, subscribe to, rate, and review our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to stay up to date with future episodes, case law updates, and breaking news. If you have any questions or are interested in learning what RRNA's outsourced legal department can do for your company, reach out to us at podcast@rreeselaw.com. That's podcast@rreeselaw.com. Follow us on LinkedIn or call 832-831-2289.